Okay, we're going to practice graphing sine and cosine. Before we get into individual problems, keep in mind that sine is going to start at the midline, it's going to end at the midline, and in between you're going to hit the midline again. If it's positive, you're going to go up A and then down A. If it's negative, you're going to reverse those. Cosine starts at a maximum, ends at a maximum, has a minimum at the midpoint, and it crosses the midline in between those 2 points. And that's going to be how we're going to have to start all of these problems. So there's a lot of information here that we have to get. And it's not always necessary to start with the first question they ask you. Although for sine and cosine, our domain is going to always be negative infinity to infinity. So we could put that in right away. Then when I looked at this, I said, okay, there's no number in front of cosine, so that means A is 1. The number in front of x or theta or t or whatever our variable is, that's going to be b. So I put that information there. I always do range kind of at the end to make sure my graph looks like that. Period is 2 pi over b. I said b was 4, so my period is going to be pi over 2. My amplitude is the absolute value of a. A is 1, so my amplitude is 1. Vertical shift. That's when we have something added or subtracted on the outside. It's not there, so I don't have to worry about it. Which means my midline is still going to be the x-axis. It's not going up or down. That's my midline. Then it gets a little bit trickier. It says start of the first cycle. When the sheet asks that, it wants to know where x starts. Well, since I don't have any information telling me anything different, the start of my first cycle is just going to be at 0. To get to the end of the first cycle, it's going to be 0 plus the period. And we just found my period was pi over 2. So 0 plus pi over 2. I'm going to end the first cycle at pi over 2. So then I have a little t-chart to fill out. Well, my starting point was at 0, and my ending point is at pi over 2. I have to figure out these 3 points, and you can watch the last video to see how that works. But one of the methods is to add these 2 together and divide by 2. And that's going to be pi over 4. Add these 2 together, divide by 2. That's going to be pi over 8. Add these 2 together, divide by 2. That's going to be 3 pi over 8. Since this is cosine, we're going to start at our maximum and we're going to end at our maximum. Since our amplitude is 1, we're just going to go up 1 and down 1. Our midpoint is going to be our minimum, so we're going to go down 1, and we're going to cross our midline in between. So once I graph, it's going to look like that. And I can see that my range, I only go up to 1 and I only go down to -1. So my amplitude is what tells me what my range is. So I'm going from -1 to 1. I'm including those endpoints because I do have a point at 1 and I do have a point at -1. You're going to try the next one on your own. Keep in mind it says graph for 2 cycles. So after you're done with the first cycle, so for example, if I was going to do this one, I would add the period again. So I would add pi over 2 again, and I would end at pi and find my points by adding them together and dividing by 2, just like I did before. So pause the video and try this next one. Okay, so now that you have tried this, this is what we should have gotten. Our domain is negative infinity to infinity. Our range is told to us by our amplitude. There's nothing in front of sine. Our period is 2 pi over b, so we have 2 pi divided by 1/3. Multiply by the reciprocal, and we will get 6 pi for our period. We have a very long one here. Vertical shift, we have nothing added or subtracted on the outside, so we're not moving up or down. Our midline is the x-axis again. Start of the cycle, since we haven't been told otherwise, we're starting at 0. End of the first cycle is going to be 6 pi. So we have 0 plus 6 pi divided by 2 is 3 pi. 0 plus 3 pi divided by 2 is 3 pi over 2. 3 pi plus 6 pi is 9 pi divided by 2 is 9 pi over 2. And we're going to go through and do that again over here. So add the period. So 6 pi plus 6 pi is 12 pi. Add together, divide by 2. Add together, divide by 2. Since this is sine, we're going to start at the midline, we're going to end at the midline, and we're going to middle at the midline. Repeat. Start at the midline, end at the midline, middle at the midline. And since it's not a negative sine function, we're going to go up A, down A, up A, down A. And that's what our graph should look like. finally, what we're going to do is we're going to look at probably the most difficult problem on here just to make sure we can do it. So skip to number 6. Okay, so let y equal, and let y equal again. So ignore that. Let y equal all of that stuff. Well, we have a is going to be 4/3. We're going to have b equals 1/3. That negative 2/3 tells me we're going down negative 2/3. When we have a set of parentheses, that's going to alter our starting point. So we're going to have to set the parentheses equal to 0. When we set the parentheses equal to 0, we solve for x. X equals negative 3 pi. And with all that information, we can start filling stuff in. So our domain is always going to be negative infinity to infinity for sine and cosine. Our range, we'll deal with that in a second. Let's graph the rest of this first. Our period is 2 pi over b. b is 1/3, so our period is going to be 6 pi when we multiply by the reciprocal. Our amplitude is a, is 4/3, so we're going to go up 4/3 and down 4/3 from our midline, which has been moved down 2/3. So our midline is y equals negative 2/3. We found the start of our first cycle by setting the parentheses equal to 0. So we're going to start at negative 3 pi. To get to the end of our first cycle, we're going to add the starting point plus the period. Negative 3 pi plus 6 pi is 3 pi. So what does that mean for our graph? Well, here's our points. We're starting at negative 3 pi. We're going to 6 pi. If we add them together and divide by 2, that's just 0. Add these two together, divide by 2 is 3 pi over 2. Add these two together, divide by 2, get 3 pi over 2. Since this is sine, we're going to start at the midline, which is negative 2/3. We're going to middle in the midline, which is negative 2/3, and we're going to end at the midline, which is negative 2/3. We're going to, since it's a positive, we're going to go up the amplitude, so we're going to add 4/3 to negative 2/3, which will be positive 2/3, and we're going to subtract 4/3 from negative 2/3, and that's going to be negative 6/3, which is in fact negative 2. Negative. So that means our range, we're going up to 2/3 and we're going down to negative 2/3. Remember, range is from smallest to biggest, so we're going to go from negative 2 to positive 2/3. So we have all those points and we get to graph them now. Make sure we're labeling all 5 of our points. Notice I kind of marked that we're going up 4/3 here and we're going down 4/3 here. We start at the midline, we end at the midline, and we middle at the midline. If you have any questions, let me know, but try the rest of this packet, please.